Hi, I'm Dave from the Comics in Motion podcast, and you're listening to Genuine Chit-Chat.
Hello there guys, and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week I'm joined by Chris Phelps of the Comics in Motion podcast, the VHS Strikes Back podcast, and the Wrestling Gold podcast, as well as Scott Weatherly from the 20th Century Geek podcast and the Stories Out of Time and Space podcast. Chris is also part of other podcasts, but I've put most of them in the description, and we do talk about that a little bit at the start. But anyway, this week's episode is about wrestling. Now, I myself don't really have an active interest in wrestling. I used to play the SmackDown vs. Raw games a little bit when I was younger on the PlayStation 2, and I've seen like bits and pieces of wrestling, but I've never been an avid watcher. I've never sat there and watched any of the WrestleManias or anything like that. I've never been to a wrestling match, and I've never been involved in the sport of wrestling either. So once I'd heard that Chris started his own podcast, Wrestling Gold, I started speaking with him about it a bit, as well as speaking with Scott, and it turns out that Scott has had a career previously in amateur wrestling. So I want to get them both on to talk about wrestling because, as I said, I myself don't really have that much knowledge about it at all, and in this podcast I'm always trying to talk to different people, getting different perspectives on things that I either didn't think about previously or just haven't really had that much of an active interest in, because I want to learn about all kinds of different things. So that's what this podcast is all about. Now, a couple of key points before we get started. Essentially, this chat, it starts off where I ask them what their experiences is with wrestling, what got them into it and things. We speak about how the different generations view wrestling differently and how the different generations of wrestlers have affected that in a different way. Scott tells some great stories of when he was a wrestler, as well as some of the information of some behind-the-scenes things of both the amateur wrestling circuit and the professional wrestling circuit. And we just talk about wrestling in general. There's a lot of crazy, weird gimmicks that we talk about towards the end. At one point, they were talking about a woman who gives birth to a hand. And yeah, a hand, like attached to the end of your arm. A woman gave birth to a hand, and she is in this storyline to do with a wrestler. They go into more detail towards the end of this, but that's the kind of weirdness that you can expect from this chat. So I had a lot of fun speaking with Scott and Chris, and the good thing is that I'm not talking very much in this because I don't really know much about wrestling, so anyone who's sick of hearing my voice quite a lot over recent episodes, you'll be glad to hear that I don't speak that much in these ones at all. So that's basically what you can look forward to in this show. There's no promo today. The intro was just by Dave, which is the other half of Comics in Motion to Chris Phelps. So I just thought I'd chuck that in there for a bit of fun, because obviously my podcast, Star Wars Comics in Canon, is also on the Comics in Motion podcast feed. And so that's about it, guys. So the chat will start shortly after the intro music, and then I'll be back at the end to tell you guys what's coming up next week, what you can expect, and also what happened in the latest episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon. So thank you so much for listening, guys. I really appreciate it. All the details and whatnot are in the description of this episode, of all the details you can use to see what Scott and Chris have been making and things, aside from guesting on this podcast. And yeah, talk to you at the end. Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. I am joined today by two good friends of mine, Chris and Scott. Now, Scott is from the 20th Century Geek podcast and Stories Out of Time and Space, and Chris has got so many podcasts, it's just silly, but you'd know you from the Comics in Motion podcast, VHS Strikes Back, the Wrestling Gold podcast, and Chris and Dave's Reality Cast, and Chat 30, for God's sake, Chris. Anyway, all the links and stuff will be in the description and stuff, but guys, it's great to have you on. I'll let you kind of say hello. Chris, say hello and nothing else, because I don't want you to talk about all your millions of podcasts. We'll be here all day.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on, mate.
And hello, Scott, as well.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Chris. You guys all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
The crazy lockdown happenings and things. It's interesting. But one of the reasons I want to get you guys on is because we're obviously in a group chat together from being on podcasts and stuff, and we've collaborated and whatnot before. And there's been a lot of conversations about wrestling, especially because, Chris, your new podcast, Wrestling Gold, well, you've got a new podcast, Wrestling Gold. Why did you start the 18,000th podcast that you've got?
It's because of your other guest today, Mr. Scott Weatherly there. So Scott, obviously, he's a massive wrestling fan like me. We got chatting off like one of the various, I think it might even be when we were doing the Star Wars ones, Mike, the collaboration between ourselves. And we, obviously Scott has been and done wrestling. He's done it. So I've got utmost respect for him for that. And we just got chatting. I ended up getting like the hat-trick ball on Scott's show. Did 3 episodes in a row. We went back to sort of our youth, and I was like, And I used to do a radio show which was a combat one, which was like MMA, because I love MMA. I've watched it for like 15, 16 years. MMA, it was a wrestling one, a bit of boxing, and I used to bring like up different events in time, and sort of what we did on Scott's was quite similar, and I was like, I've got to do this again. I need to do something. So I have created another podcast, as you say, mate, the Wrestling Gold, and here we are. So yeah, I got to thank Scott, and also, as usual, Mr. Chris here, not realising like all the editing and everything else that goes with it. I don't regret it at all because I love it, because I'm not doing it every week. I'm just doing it bi-weekly at the moment because I don't want to put myself under too much pressure, because if I go weekly, it's ridiculous. So, yeah, that's where it's come from, Mike.
That's cool. And Scott, so with you and wrestling, obviously, why don't we just delve into it, sort of, because with me, I'll preface this and say, I don't know much about wrestling at all. I know I could probably name 10, 15 wrestlers, I guess, but that's because I played the WWE and SmackDown versus Raw games from PS2 days. So my first wrestling experience, in a sense, was basically playing the games, and I've only got drips and drabs of seeing wrestling since then. So, Scott, when did you first see any kind of wrestling? What was your first taste?
I think like Chris and I have got sort of similar experiences with it. So mine goes back to the sort of late 80s, early 90s. That sort of it's sort of the peak or the end of the sort of the family friendly WWF days. Sky was just coming out, sort of satellite TV, and we were getting the American stuff. I think there's been a little bit of WCW that was on Channel 4 and stuff. But so it was just there in the background. I remember sort of friends that had Sky and stuff. I'd go around and see, Saturday Night Main Event, or there was the odd pay-per-view that would sort of appear. And obviously the big one, which Chris and I did not long ago, was SummerSlam 1992, and it was in the UK, is in Wembley. So that whole era was just sort of just there. It was just sort of a part and parcel of it. I mean, I remember vividly when I was at primary school, so way back when, way back in the late 80s, but there was trading cards, and it was that sort of like, need that one, and you trade with your mates. And there were these little blue cards, and they had the images on the front. And they were awesome. But I can really remember just sort of stood in the playground, like trading cards. Sort of like, oh yeah, I need a Hulk Hogan. Oh, you've got a big boss man. All right, well, I'll trade you this big boss man and this Mountie for your Hogan. Would you, do you want to swap that? And the other weird thing is, I remember I moved primary schools in year 5. For any American viewers, don't know what that is. But it's in year 5 in primary school, so I was going to a different school. And a friend of mine, one of the guys that was leaving, like literally his sort of like going away present for me was 2 cards. It was a big boss man card and an Ultimate Warrior card. I still remember that. But yeah, it was weird. It was just a part of the culture, I think, as a kid. And it just sort of stuck in my head, like just the sort of just the pomp and pageantry of the whole thing, the sort of the flamboyantness of it, but also the fact that these guys, like, because as a kid you think it's real, I was like, man, these guys are decking each other and like just getting so into the storylines and stuff that it just sort of stuck with me throughout most of the 90s. I mean, I'll admit it, I probably didn't confess to much liking wrestling when I was at secondary school much, but no, it sort of all stuck with me after that.
Okay, and Chris, what about you? What was your first taste of wrestling?
It's pretty similar, actually, because I remember them Top Trumps cards, Scott. I mean, me and you talked about it. It was one of them things, Mike, where if you had an Ultimate Warrior Hulk Hogan, they were like rated 99, like invincible, basically. And I remember I had a Marvel set of like Captain America. I think it's Galactus was like one of the best because he was 60 foot tall. Yeah. So it was just like, and it went from the wrestling to the Marvel stuff, but the wrestling ones were like gold. If you got an Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan, it was literally, you would give your lung away to try and get them cards. And I started watching sort of like the English wrestling on a Saturday afternoon, Dickie Davis on the ITV. And then it went to, like, they used to show flashes of this American wrestling around about the late 80s, and you used to see like Macho Man and Hogan. I remember Hogan because I'm a massive Rocky fan. Even as a kid then, I was like 88, say roughly, I was like 10. I knew he was Thunder Lips. I knew who he was. And they used to show little segments of Hogan and Macho Man to maybe around about SummerSlam 88, 89. And then it just grew. Mike, and I believed every single part of it. I believed every single bit of it was real. I had no reason to believe that a guy would come dressed as an Undertaker to the ring and what a fight. Someone dressed as the Ultimate Warrior. He was just a fucking lunatic with face paint on. It didn't cross my mind that you would never see these sort of characters in a pub or in day-to-day life. I just genuinely, that disassociation. And I think that's also, maybe I knew all along, but I said on Scott's show when we did SummerSlam 92, it ruined it because the Legion of Doom come in and Hawk at Legion, he was absolutely wankered. And you could see that he's talking and the $1 Million Man's talking to him, telling the moves. And my dad's going, he's telling him the moves. And I'm like, no, he's not. And he did. And it ruined it for me. And I was like, oh, it is fake. I don't believe it. Hulk Hogan doesn't take his vitamins and say his prayers.
Oh, he does. He does.
But
it just doesn't
not legal.
Just didn't make a difference in the ring, that's all.
Yeah, exactly. Funny enough, sorry, I'm going to slightly meander around, Mike. I'm really sorry.
No,
I watched the match last night of Hulk Hogan, who is renowned as like the stiffest, crappiest wrestler ever, and he was wrestling in Japan, and he was doing all these moves because he has to. I'll have to send it to you, Scott, Mike. I know you don't really watch it, Mike.
No, I'm definitely good.
I'd love to get you to come on and watch an event, say, with me and Scott. Just give your honest opinion. It'd be so good to you to review it.
You say that about Hogan, though. I'll tell you what, right? If you go back to those sort of like, I think it's like the late 70s, really early 80s, just at the sort of start when it was the WWF, when it was Vince McMahon Sr., and you go back and you see a young Terry Bollea doing stuff, before he became Hulk Hogan. He moved a lot faster and he was a lot more agile in the ring. Like you'd see him do like an Insagori, or you'd see him do sort of like a standing leg drop, or a standing sort of drop kick. Coming off at least the middle rope and stuff like that. Like I think he clocked on at some point that longevity was the sort of the card of the day, and so decided to sort of reduce his in-ring move set to like 3 moves, and it was all about pumping up the crowd really rather than doing so. But I've seen matches of him in Japan; they're actually really good.
Excellent,
and they're worth sort of seeking out.
They are. Sorry, Mike, I went off on one.
Sorry.
That's right.
Sorry.
I do want to hear about these sort of things with like wrestling and stuff. So it's good, and I would love to come on Wrestling God. I've been thinking I want to do something similar with MMA because obviously where I listen to a lot of Rogan, he obviously talks about MMA a lot, and so I've seen bits and pieces of MMA like that. I think I appreciate the craft of MMA slightly more due to. Obviously, it's real in egg quotes.
Yeah.
But so I think wrestling does get that sort of undue credit from a lot of people who don't like it, or people who just kind of dismiss it really quickly and just be like, "Oh, there's no talent in it." And it's like the amount of physical fitness you need to do those sort of things is stupid. And also from what I've heard, obviously you guys know a lot more about it than me, but when they get hit in the face with things, it is actually them getting hit in the face with things. I think they pull the hit so it's not as hard, but they're still getting smacked around, aren't they?
Yeah. Right. Let's get into it really, because I can talk from experience.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
There's a couple of things worth. Yeah, physical fitness is a definite part of it. I mean, I've never been a small chap. I'm basically built like a dumpling, and but you still have to run around the ring. So and so you build your moves and your sort of style around what you can do. And I was a brawler. But I could do stuff, and you still had to bump, and you still had to learn to flip and do all this other stuff. So. It took it out of you, like it really did. I was probably, at my fittest when I was at my heaviest, weirdly enough.
How old were you when you sort of...
How old? About 20, what was it? I came out of university, so I was about 21 when I started it, and I went well up till about 2013, I sort of stopped. It was the last time I sort of really wrestled. So, I went for almost 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it does. It really takes a lot of physical fitness. But the one thing is that sort of people don't get credit for, you do in the industry. If you're in the know, you sort of get it. Physical fitness is fine, but there have been wrestlers that are incredibly technically talented and incredibly physically fit, but have got no charisma. They've got no ring presence and no sort of savvy with the crowd. They just die. Like nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see them. And so you get people, then you get the other end of the spectrum where, you get ones that sort of probably aren't hugely physically fit or may not have a huge moveset and do a great deal, but they can get the crowd going. They can get over the crowd. Like, the crowd just seems to get behind them. And that's it. Like, that's it, that those guys will run to the top and they'll end up getting a championship run and all that kind of stuff. It's an interesting sort of way things work. You know, you can physically see a guy and go, yeah, he's going to make it. Like, he looks like he's got the body. That sort of thing that Vince McMahon sort of starts with. But then I'm thinking of, like, there's been plenty. There was there was a guy, I forget his name, Chris something or other, and he was supposed to be like the model of the body, a huge guy, and he did sort of the full Nelson challenge. He'd put these guys in like a full Nelson and just like ring them around the ring and all this other stuff. In the sort of early mid to late 2000s.
Chris Masters.
That was it, Chris Masters. But he was garbage. Like, he looked the piece, and he wasn't bad in the ring, but he had no charisma. He couldn't do anything with the crowd. And he was gone in about 18 months. So yeah, it's weird. Sort of, it really does take a real mixture of things to, I mean, if you look at it, like, you think of the peak of it, you think like Triple H or The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I mean, they're physically fit and incredibly good workers, and they can work the crowd. And then you look at Mick Foley, who looks basically like a homeless guy, but just so over and so willing to push himself that, like, he just got a career out of it. And that's like, he is great in the ring, incredibly great ring technician. But you look at him and go, nah, no chance. But he's an icon. So, yeah, it's an interesting mix.
And obviously, when you were in amateur wrestling and things, I don't know if this is an answer you can give that's clear for this, because it's quite a weird question almost, but like, from, say, where it is fake, in the big leagues and things, obviously down into the sort of amateur rings in local areas and things, it's not. Is there just like a point where once you get enrolled into, like, have you guys seen Fighting with My Family?
Oh yeah, good film. Good film.
It's brilliant. Really, really good film. Actually, me and Megan watched it recently. It's really cool. That gave an insight into wrestling in a respect that I didn't have, but didn't sort of acknowledge in the same way. And in that, obviously, there's a part where it's like, I would go out there and fight her at the end and win and things. And it's like, but is it basically, if they tell it from what you guys maybe potentially know, is it like, you have to do it this way, do it as showmany as you want and make sure people still like you, because then you've got a career and people want to see you fight other people. But if you lose, you're still, like, where's it go from who's the best here physically, who can actually pin the other person, to you have to this is the storyline, if you know what I'm asking.
Oh yeah, no. There is never ever, and anyone there will. I'm trying to think of a way of putting it. Okay, 90% of the time, it is a full-on show. Mm-hmm. Okay, that other 10% is where you get people that probably really don't like each other, and they're probably going to kick the crap out of each other no matter what happens. And I've seen that. I've seen it happen where you've got two guys that have got a real grudge, and the promoter's just gone, do you know what? Do what you got to do, make it a show, but take it out on each other. And I've seen guys like literally like lumping on each other, and you're sort of like, it doesn't happen often, but it does. But no, fundamentally, everything else is a show. Like, you turn up to a show, any promotion, whether you work for them a lot or a little or just a one-off. The point is, you walk in, they give you the card, right, you're on third, you're with this person, you're going over, is you winning or you're not, and the point of the match is this. Go away, sort it out. That's it. And a lot of, and if you work for a promotion a lot, because for me, I came up through a promotion called MPW, which is Midlands Professional Wrestling. They trained me, a guy called Magic, Psycho Steve, Mad Mike, who's still a great friend of mine. All these guys, and when they put on shows, like, they'd be like, okay, here's the story of the show. So you'd start much like Vince and that do with the big guys. It's exactly the same. Like, you are putting on a show for the audience, and so the idea was, you'd come in and they'd say, right, we're going to start with a promo that this guy and this guy are going to have a 5 minute. Right, you got 5 minutes set up that your feud for the evening, and then just before the halftime, there's going to be so-and-so and so-and-so, we're going to be in the ring, you're going to run in to do this, that sets up the main event. And then everything else. So that's how it all works. It's a panto. And you say about the good guy and the bad guy. I mean, I was predominantly a heel, which is a bad guy, for most of my career. I enjoyed being a good guy, but I found it difficult because I was so big. I'm 6 foot, I'm bald, I'm heavy, it was quite, I'm wearing black. It was quite difficult to sort of get over as a goodie at times, or as a face. But to be a heel was awesome. It's so much fun. I mean, it's the panto villain. I'll let Chris talk in a bit, but I'll just tell you about this. Because so what it was is, when I came, I was John Bull, And the idea behind John Bull is, the reason I chose that gimmick is, it's John Bull is the personification of Britain, from the sort of Punch magazines from Victorian and Edwardian times. Sort of Big Daddy kind of thing. But the idea, I thought, well, what would you have if Big Daddy was around? You wouldn't be that sort of notion, and people are going to probably argue this, but the notion of being hugely patriotic and all that sort of thing, like, it goes too far. If John Bull got to vote in the Brexit election, he'd have voted for Brexit. He was that kind of person. Not shutting anybody down who did, but he was just, that's the character I played, was sort of like, he was bolshy, he thought he was better than everyone, he thought he was smarter than everyone, but he was bigger and a bully, and that was it. And you could come out to the ring, and the 2 or 3 rules that we were sort of taught as a character, it was to basically always stick with your character. So if ever there was a mistake in the ring, you stick in character, right? Because there's nothing worse than someone having a bump that goes wrong and you go, oh my God, are you all right? Because that's it then. The match is done. But the others were, if you were a baddie, you went out first. Heels always go out first because they set the tone. Because it's easier for the guy to come over as a goodie if you've already gone out and annoyed and pissed everybody off in the crowd. So and then you go out and you pick someone. It could be a family, it could be an individual, but you'd be watching from behind this sort of curtain and going, right, who reacts well? They do. Right, they're my target. They're going to react to me quite well. So you'd go out, do your stuff around the ring, jump in the ring, and they'd be your target. Every time you got a point, you'd have a go at this person, you want to try something, get in the ring, do this, do it, you're a wuss, blah, blah, whatever you want to say to them. And the crowd gets behind them and the face. That's your job as a baddie. Because what they want to do is, by the end of the match, if the heel wins, you want them to jeer and shout at you. And if the face wins, you want them to cheer and be happy that they've beaten you. That's my job as a baddie, as a heel. So, and that's a success to me. If that happens, that's what good. I mean, I'll take 2 quick stories. We did a show in Syston, which is near Leicester, many, many years ago. And there was a dad and his kid there, and they were just so into it. They were so into it. And I came out, and I thought, right, I'm having those. That's it. They're my target. So I came out and I started sort of like shouting at the dad, and the kid stood up to me, and he must have been no older than 8, but he literally squared up to me. And I was like, come on then. And I lifted sort of like past it, and I went to lift the rope up to get him in the ring, and he went for it. And I was like, and all of a sudden I'm looking at the ref and thinking, right, ref, you've got to step in now. And so the ref did. The ref sort of like stopped the kid. I was like, no, you can't come in the ring. And that's me then. For the rest of the match then, I'm having a go at this kid. You chickened out. And the kid's go, I wasn't allowed it. No, you chickened out. That's not, you. And that's perfect, because then all of a sudden I've got this 8-year-old that the entire crowd are getting behind against me. And I look like a right knobhead compared to this kid. So that was great. And then another time, I also worked with a tag team partner for many years, a guy called Scott Galsworthy, who went to Scotty Grimm. And we were called the Icons of Dominance, 2 big lads we were. It was great. But we did a show in Wales, and you hear the sort of the cliche of the old woman with the handbag, you know what I mean, or the brolly sort of beating you. That happened. We won a match. We had a squash match where these sort of guys came out, these 2 smaller guys, and we just obliterated them. It was a setup for a later match in the night, but we flattened these guys. All of a sudden, these 2 old biddies came out of the crowd and were hitting us with their purses and handbags. And like the crowd were like, yeah, you get them. Go on, Mildred, give them a bloody good beating. And that was it, and that was our job. If we got the crowd reacting to us, like that's when you feel, you come backstage and you're like, yes, I won that one. That was what it was like. That was why it was good fun.
That's amazing. I mean, the stories there in themselves are incredible, but I don't know anything, obviously, about the sort of era of it. With you, Chris, have you done anything, because obviously this is kind of sparked from obviously what you said earlier about the little Twitter feud between your guys' pseudonyms. Do you want to go to sort of your pseudonym, and have you had any experience wrestling or anything like that, or physical combat or training, anything like that?
Yeah, I've not had wrestling. It was one of my ambitions since I love wrestling, since I was a kid, and Scott, quite nicely decided to call me out. John Bull has decided to call me out. So I've got to do something about it, Mike. So, no, I looked into it quite a lot, like when I was in my early 20s, but around probably the same time Scott was looking at age-wise. I know there's a couple of years between us, but I was like, right, I want to do it. So I sought out a couple of wrestling promotions in Manchester, do all the training and everything. And then around about the time, and it's not an excuse, around the time, I had like my daughter, she's 19 now, when I'm 41, so it was a long time ago. It never came off. Every time I went to do it, I don't know whether I just didn't have the bottle to do it, or I couldn't afford it. It may have been more of a costing type of thing, and I just didn't do it. In respect of combat stuff, I've done I did a little bit of boxing, but I did train for a couple of years doing MMA. So wrestling is what they say when you say about amateur wrestling. What's really bizarre, Mike, and Scott attests to this, is amateur wrestling is real wrestling, but professional wrestling is choreographed fake wrestling storyline. It's what I love, but it's ridiculous that someone who's doing it properly, like they always say, if you want to get far in MMA, especially in this day and age, you have to have a wrestling base. It's why there's never been a lot of UK MMA fighters. Michael Bisping won the middleweight title a few years ago. He's from he based himself from Manchester, but he's actually from Lancashire area, and he learned wrestling as he got older. But in schools in America, they have to do wrestling as part of their curriculum. Like, you've got Brock Lesnar now. And what you find is, Mike, a lot of amateur successful wrestlers go into the WWE or they go into MMA, depending on what they've got. And you have a few crossover ones. There's a guy called Bobby Lashley who does it. And that's where they come from. So I did like the MMA stuff and that. And I know that on your body, wrestling, professional wrestling, what Scott did is far worse than MMA, because MMA, you might, if you're working in the WWE or WWF as it was called, you will be working 300 days of the year. And I don't just mean, you've got to travel to these events, but you are hitting the moves, your heads, that's why there was so many concussions. People had around about the 2000s, people were having loads of like neck surgery, things like that, because the toll on your body. I do MMA, and I, like I said, I've just had a shoulder up, and some of it was caused because of jiu-jitsu. I know it was. But I might only train a couple of times a week, and then I was gearing up to have a fight. I'm not a fighter. I probably would have got absolutely smoked, but it was just a case of I wanted to step into a ring. And it was just, I love doing it. I love watching it as a fan, and it was a natural progression. And there's nothing more humbling than someone who's about 17, 18-year-old kicking the shit out of you, because you realise, even when I was doing it, it was like when I was like 38, 39, I've not done it for a couple of years now. There's nothing more humbling than thinking you can look after yourself and getting spanked. And that's pretty much the vibe I'm getting from John Bull when we get into the ring. I may be in a bit of trouble. It could almost be like, Thunderlips, the ultimate male with the ultimate meatball. Could be getting thrown all over. Because Dave, mate, he's absolutely pissing himself. Dave, my co-host, to anyone out there, he's fucking loving it. He keeps sending me pictures, Scott, saying, Scott, he's going to fucking muller you. And he thinks it's hilarious. So, for me, I love challenges. I love doing these sort of things. And obviously, being Scott, good mates and that. But I really... I'm intrigued to see. I know I can do it. I know I can take a bump, because you learn how to fall when you're doing training. You're falling on your, but it doesn't matter. It still hurts. I know it does. I know it's going to hurt. It's just you train your body a certain way and that. So I've got to do all that first. And obviously I don't want to bottle it. Me and Scott had a talk about it, and I was like, right, I want to do it. And he's like, right, we are going to do it. And like Scott said before we recorded kayfabe, at the end of the day, not everyone's going to get on, that's life, but you are working together to create something. And what Scott was saying I found so interesting, because from a storyline point of view, and you've done it, Scott, there's no way I was going to interrupt what you were saying, because I know that as a fan, and I read all like the behind the scenes stuff, Mike, and everything. But I would never. I've got so much respect for Scott, because he's done it. So it's like me, I can't say to someone, oh, this is what you should, I ain't got a clue. I know how it works, I know what happens, but I've never actually done that. I mean, the closest I've got to being with a crowd is I was in a band for like 8 years. Me and Dave, that's how me and Dave knew. And I was the gobby one. But I sort of know how to work a crowd, but I certainly don't know how to work a wrestling crowd, And like Scott said, I would love to more probably be the heel, because you can be a complete cock and it doesn't matter. But when you're trying to be the smiley high five guy to all the crowd, that is probably the worst thing in the world. So if you don't get over, people are just like, fucking who is this joke? We want the real act on next sort of thing. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting subject, mate. Really, really will be an interesting year, hopefully.
And are you just sort of vague on it? You don't have to delve into too much. I'm not trying to overplan, but do you guys vaguely know, you can be like, oh, in a year's time, we're going to do wrestling and we're going to do it? Have you kind of figured out many of the details?
Not really. No, not really.
Wait for the lockdown to be over.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, I was just saying to Mike before we started as well, I've had 8 weeks at home recuperating from this op and stuff, and I had to go and work today, put my work pants on, mate. Oh, my God. I've been training pretty much all the time as well. I'm like, yeah, I need to sort my food out because I've just been on a fucking... basically an all-inclusive for nearly 8 weeks, I think. I'm usually dead strict, and I'm like, oh my God, I can literally just get them on. So there's got to be a lot of training going down before we start anything next year. But I'm up for the challenge, Mike. It should be good. It'll be a good fun.
And obviously, Chris, you live, this is just my own personal thing, don't say any specifics about addresses, but you live, obviously, Manchester. Where do you live generally, Scott?
I live sort of south of Derby, really, sort of small, just near a little place called Swadley Coat, south of Derby. So, no, yeah, it'll be easy. What I was thinking is, in my head, one of the things I've sort of said to Chris is, we'll figure it out as we go. I've got to find a local promotion as well, so I can get back in, get some of the get used to the bumps, because taking the bumps, I mean, Chris is right, the toll it takes on your body. When I was in my 20s, you're sort of doing it. I was doing nowhere near what the WWE guys were doing. That like Chris says, that guy, they take a toll. But there was a period for about 2 years where I was doing it almost every weekend, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday, Saturday would be your shows, training on Sunday, doing bumps, and your body gets conditioned to it. But you do get some, the side effects are sort of tweaks and pains and that sort of thing. So it can really sort of take a toll on your body. But one of the things I always remember is, the first time I started wrestling, the first time I trained for almost 18 months before I got in the ring with another person for a match. And one of the things they do is drills. So one of the things MPW was sort of really keen on was drills. So the first sort of half an hour of the training session on a Sunday afternoon was bumps. And you'd start, and it would basically be, right, I want to see 5 back bumps. So you'd go, okay, and you're on coconut mats, sort of the blue, not the blue, massive spongy ones, just the thin, those sort of a couple of inch thick blue coconut mats.
From schools and things.
Yeah. So you'd be bumping onto those. So throw yourself on your back, right, get up, roll up, get up, do another one. And you're doing this in groups, 5 of those. Okay, now I want to see 5 front bumps, 5 side bumps. Now I want to see a flip, and doing that. And then maybe it's nightmares, I don't know, but I can still picture it in my head like magic could stand at the front of the room as a trainer and be like, right, back bump. And you get up and you go, right, side bump. Right, now front bump, front flip, do this. And you'd do it for half an hour. And then they'd take us through moves and they'd have the ring out and you'd go through all that sort of stuff. And at the end of it, they had what they called impact hell. And this was for you to get conditioning because your body had to gets used to it. When you play guitar and they say you're going to get calluses on your fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's about the same, so we'd have impact hell or we'd have suplex hell. And what you do is you'd have everyone lined up and someone stood at a big crash mat. Suplex hell was you had to suplex everybody in that line as fast as possible. So you'd be, okay, right, grab them, suplex, right, go fisherman suplex, right, German suplex, whatever you wanted to do, body-to-body slam. You do all this, and you have to work through that thing as fast as possible because it gets you used to doing the moves, but also you can, your cardio is up. Impact hell was you had to stand there and take a hit from everybody in that line. So it could be a clothesline, it could be a drop kick, it could be a flying shoulder block, it could be anything they wanted to do, running knee. You had to sort of, the idea was, because it gets your reactions up as well, was you had to do it, right, take your bump, bang, get up, see what they're going to do the next one, bang, bang, bang. So it could be, clothesline, right, that's a back bump. Someone's coming at you with a running knee. Okay, well, I've got to do a flip bump over them. Right, fine. It was, and that was it, the drills, because it gets you used to it. So in the ring, if you see someone's coming at you with ready for a running knee, you may not have heard them call it, but you can see it. You go, oh, I know what I'm going to do. And you just react to it. That was the idea. Yeah.
Chris got that little foot look forward to then, haven't you, Chris?
Yeah, it depends. I don't think if we're going to do 1 or 2 matches, I don't think he has to go through that sort of thing.
No, he does.
That was the idea. Yeah.
No compromise. That's it. It's on the podcast now. Putting it on the internet. Yeah. Nothing you guys can do about this. I'm obviously joking, Chris. I'm looking forward to it though. It sounds like Scott's just trying to scare Chris though.
No. I think Chris will be fine.
I'm just putting his leg.
Yeah, but he's got to be scared when he gets in the ring. Training's going to be fine.
I am. I know. The fucking bottle will probably go leading up to it, but I'm not saying I'll be fine, but I sort of know what to expect because I think Scott's right. Them mats, there's no forgiving him at all, mate. When we were doing some of that judo shit, oh my God, it was just like, a couple of times you're winded and you're like, what the holy hell is going on? You know, you think it'll take the impact and it doesn't. And if you don't land right, and they'll tell you you've got to land, you land on your elbows, don't you, Scott? And then your body sort of just flops just behind it, and that makes more of an impact on the sound. So many times I missed that, you know. I remember getting absolutely thrown over and like I thought it broke my hip, you know. And then we used to do that Krav Maga one as well, where like they put a fencing mask on you, a bulletproof vest, and tape it to you. And then you'd have 6-7 people attacking you, and you just like, it's just hell on earth, absolute hell on earth. But I don't think I'd probably prefer that the way Scott's just said that. I think, mate.
I just feel a lot like more scared than the two of you, because obviously I'm a lot more soft and squishy than you guys. Like I used to play badminton a lot, which is like the least contact sport ever. And then also I used to play dodgeball, but I was really good at dodgeball, so I wouldn't really get hit that much. So that's what I'm saying. I'm sticking to it. And it's, you know, with those games, I didn't do a lot of the contact stuff. I didn't used to like to play rugby. I've always been a sort of bigger guy. I've got slimmer as I've gotten older, but that's through diet and exercise and things. But I never was into rugby or wrestling or anything like that. So for me, that being lifted up and thrown on the ground and all that sort of stuff, my skin is like, no. It's like I'm not as hardened as you guys, I would say. But I'm excited to see you guys go into the ring. I was also going to say, whenever you guys end up sorting it out, not necessarily open on the podcast, but we'll have to talk about it, because I'd love to come up north if it's like a weekend thing. Like come up north and we can all sort of meet in person. Yeah. That'd be a lot of fun. Great. And then watch Scott absolutely nail Chris. But it'll be.
I think what the shock's going to be, Mike, and this is like would be typical wrestling, if fucking Dave walked in as Scott's manager with a fucking Jimmy Hart, like either like a tennis racket or a Jimmy Hart megaphone, like that. Get the bastard, get him! I've always wanted someone to kill him, you know. Because like obviously me and Dave are good mates, but I think my size would probably outpower Dave. I think he did do a bit of karate, though, martial arts. He actually competed as well, to be fair. But I'd have to get him on the floor quick, I think, before he gives me a swift kick to the head. But but that'd be the ultimate heel turn from Dave, and then Dave leaves me and says, I'm going and doing podcasts with Scott now. That'd be proper keeping it in character, wouldn't it?
Just slowly kick you out of Comics in Motion and the whole thing, just push you over, and you're just left with your reality cast.
And
that's it. Your Scott takes over Wrestling Gold.
You could have that couple. We could have like, we used to have retirement matches, Mike. So you have like a loser leaves town type match. You could have like a loser leaves podcast, slips or podcast or something like that.
Yeah, microphone on a pole match.
That'd be great, that.
That's amazing. And just out of interest, sort of changing gears slightly, with you guys and wrestling, have you been to any, obviously Scott has because he's performed in them, but have you been to any sort of big either MMA, boxing or wrestling matches? Like, sort of
this is going to be sacrilege, because this is one of the reasons why we've gone down this route, me and Scott, is I've never been. One of the things with me, Mike, was when we were kids, and the oldest of 9 kids, we could not afford. Mum and Dad could not be dropping 30, 40 quid on a ticket for me, and not on the other. They just couldn't afford it. And as I got older, I always kept up on it. And honestly, there's been a couple of near misses where I've like gone to go to Manchester Arena to watch it. I even was going to travel to Leeds when it was on one year, I think Sheffield. And I just never got right. Because I was in the band for so long, every weekend was taken up with gigging. So I just didn't do it. And then about 2 years ago, I was going to take my godson, because I was training him. I mean, to be fair, he was only 10. He wanted to come and train. His mum said, like, a friend of ours, can you look after him? And all he wanted to do really was a training for 20 minutes. This is God's honest truth. We were going to go to Manchester Arena. The only way, and his mum said, I'm going to pay for you both to go, because Chris, you're helping him. He's lost a bit of weight. He's really changed his attitude. She was trying to sort of get him out of himself when he went to secondary school. And the only way, after about 3 or 4 months, he stopped like any interest in training, because I couldn't do too much with him because of his age. We had to stand outside, and to get him to do cardio, he's a massive wrestling fan, a huge wrestling fan. he had to run up and down these ladders and he'd finish with a wrestling move and I had to guess it because he's only 10. And this went on. But bear in mind, I'm a big wrestling fan. There's only so many times you can see him pick up a sandbag and do the Randy Orton, the RKO or Hulk Hogan body slam or whatever. And then as a reward, I'd have to get my PS2 set up so he could play them Raw, these SmackDown games, Royal Rumbles. And his mum would be like, he absolutely loves coming to your house. I was like, yeah, because he's not fucking doing what he should be. He's just come around playing computer games and doing toy wrestling, So they were like my opportunities to go and it just never came off, sadly. So as much as I'm a wrestling fan, I'm also a bit of a fake wrestling fan, a bit like an armchair supporter with football. I've never actually been to an event, really.
Have you never been to a football game either?
Oh, mate! Oh, God! No, I had season ticket holder at Manchester United.
I was going to say, I was like, no, you have.
Oh, no. I've lived right near the ground all my life. Yeah, that's one thing I'm definitely not an armchair supporter of. It's only the last couple of years I've had to get rid of it because of finances, but I'd still be there now if I could.
Oh, that's fair enough. I mean, and I have interest then, Scott, do you say that you haven't, you've been obviously to the ones that you've been involved in, but what about like MMA, boxing, or the air quotes big wrestling?
Yeah, I've not really been to any sort of boxing or MMA, but I've been to I've been to other promotions. There was a couple of larger UK promotions. I went to see those, and I saw the WWE when it came to the UK a couple of times. But the big one for me was I went to WrestleMania 25. I think you can like WrestleMania. It is like it's the big show. It was a biggie.
Oh, yeah, I mean, as in, I don't know to say yes or no because I know nothing about wrestling. So it's not like WrestleMania. It's more like WrestleMania. I don't know.
It was amazing. It was WrestleMania 25. It was in Houston, Texas, and I got the tickets because some of the guys I did shows with were going anyway, and one of their guys, really unfortunately broke his leg. And so couldn't go. And they were like, oh, we've got a spare ticket, Scott, do you want it? And I was just like, yes! Sort of like pulling every bank account of favour I could get sort of to pay for this trip. And flew out. We got the full sort of works. We got we did the whole WrestleMania weekend. It was in Houston and we were in one of the big American hotels. And basically, because they'd booked it through the wrestling sort of like setup, like this hotel was just full of people that were there for WrestleMania. So there were people like going around sort of like Ric Flair was back in the WWE at the time, was doing a bit of a run on a couple of things. One was a manager and stuff, but so everyone was like going like woo, like up and down the corridors and doing this stuff. It was awesome. But the main thing we did, the show was fantastic. I mean, I saw Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels, which was awesome. Triple H versus I think Randy Orton. But the main thing is I got to go to the Hall of Fame induction for that year, and I got to see Stone Cold Steve Austin inducted into the Hall of Fame. Like Stone Cold's my biggest, most favourite. And so that got quite emotional, to be honest. But yeah, that was amazing. That was incredible going to see that and going to see the really like, the biggest of the WWE shows and sort of seeing them pull that off was absolutely incredible.
That's awesome. And you say that Stone Cold Steve Austin was your sort of favourite wrestler. Is that, Chris, do you have a favourite?
That's him. Stone Cold.
Yeah. Oh, so you both have the same favourite?
Oh, I love him. I mean, I grew up with Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. That's when I first got into it. Hulk Hogan is the man who put the flag for wrestling with Vince McMahon in the 80s, without a doubt, Mike. But Stone Cold for me is even now when his music hits, which is glass breaking, I can get chills. There's a certain moment from WrestleMania 32 a couple of years ago when he came back, and there's a little segment. He hasn't wrestled for years, and he just come back and did a quick run. He actually messed his shoulder up, funny enough, and had to have a proper operation and that on it. But he came in, and just the crowd go mad because you had three legends like Mick Foley's Scott's favourite wrestler. You've got Shawn Michaels come back, and then he was in Texas as well. Was it in Austin, Texas, that one, Scott?
It was, yeah.
And honestly, Mike, if you ever see the Stone Cold return from the crowd's view when people were filming it, honestly, I can watch that all day. There's about 5 or 6 different videos, and the crowd go absolutely bananas for him coming back because he's just like, he is, without that, he's sold the most merchandise ever, even over Hulk Hogan. I think John Cena's a close second now, and I think Hogan was in the top 3 or 4, but at one point Hogan was everything, Hulkamania. Stone Cold is the man. I listen to his podcast literally every week. I love Stone Cold. He's so, because what it was, we know it's all thing, but there was always that in my head when he used to watch him fight, like, I'd say what, it doesn't look like he's pulling any punches. And me and Scott talked about, we did on Wrestling Gold, the first episode, we did WrestleMania 14 where Mike Tyson was the enforcer. Mike Tyson had just been banned for biting Evander Holyfield's ear, had no money. Vince McMahon brings him in as a wrestling fan. He comes in as an enforcer, and there was a little segment with Stone Cold. Stone Cold pushes him, Tyson pushes him, and I believed like Stone Cold could beat Tyson up in a real fight, you know, and it's like, what were you on, Chris? And I was like 18, 19 at this point, you know, I was with me, like sat like my wife now, I was actually engaged in that, and I'm thinking, you're an idiot, Chris, you know, but I did believe it, thinking, no, in a real fight, and I still believe that was true, even though I knew it wasn't, and I think that Stone Cold brought a level of realism to the wrestling that had never really been there, like it really did come through as just a brawler off the street. I loved him, I still love him, absolutely love him.
It's a weird one, because it's this thing of, with wrestling, the other thing with wrestling, Mike, is wrestling fans are incredibly, and this in the best possible way, they're incredibly forgetful and incredibly forgiving. So to use Stone Cold as an example, Stone Cold Steve Austin actually came into, you know, he'd been in WCW before, how much he did the promotion as Stunning Steve Austin, and then he had a whole bunch of problems with WCW and went to a sort of an indie, the biggest indie promotion, ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, and worked there for a bit. And he cut this promo, and he had like long blonde hair at the time, but he cut this promo there, and it was all about basically what a douchebag Hogan was, and sort of like how bad sort of like Eric Bischoff, who was running at WCW at the time, was, and how he'd been held back and all this other stuff. It's really interesting to see him work this promo, because it's legit. It's from the heart. Like, you know, he's really venting about how he feels. And then so Vince sort of picks him up, and he joins the the WF at the time, and he gets brought in as the ringmaster working for $1 Million Man, and he's wearing like green trunks. He's the $1 Million champion. He's got like a buzz cut, but not quite the bald look yet. And he's like, he's all right, but it just doesn't work. You know, like, you know, he's ever Steve Austin, you know, the ringmaster, but it just doesn't work. And then all of a sudden, like, he says it himself, like, he was thinking, like, how can I make this gimmick? What have I got to do? And he comes up with this idea. I think he saw something on serial killers or assassins, and this idea of a Stone Cold Killer. And he's like, that's it, I've hit the nail on the head. In fact, his wife actually said it to him, like, that's what you want to do. So he came up with this idea of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that was it. And, like, you know, then they sort of hit the ground running with that. And it sort of took off, like, this character and this gimmick, because it was more him. It was just like, you know, him and a lot of others have said the best versions are the ones that, like, you know, a person turned up to 11. So it was that. But nobody seems to remember that he was like the ringmaster or Stunning Steve Austin or Stunning, yeah, there's other stuff. Nobody remembers it or even talks about it. It's when he was Stone Cold Steve Austin, like. But it really came to when he brought the realism. I don't know if you remember this, Chris, because it sort of always sticks out in my head. When they brought it to really sort of nail it home how they wanted to make it a bit more real, and they started to introduce what they call the Attitude Era in the late 90s, Steve Austin had a tag team partner in Brian Pillman.
Yep.
And they were the Hollywood Blondes, and they did all this other stuff in WCW. And so Austin brought Pillman in, and they ran this angle where Pillman sort of like is basically dishing Austin and a load of other stuff, and Austin loses it and turns up like with a camera crew to Pillman's house and smashes it up. And Pillman's in there with his wife with a gun. Like, this was on. I mean, I think the WWE got into a lot of trouble for this. Actually, they showed it like before Watershed, and Pillman's in there with a gun, and Austin's like kicking in the door and smashing windows. He's like, "I'm gonna rip your head off," and all this other stuff. And then finally, it ends with the police just saying like, "He's got a gun," and you hear the gun fire, and it cut away, and people were gobsmacked. Like, this is a wrestling show. What are they doing? But that was it. Like, all of a sudden, like, you know, gone were your sort of the gimmicks, like, you know, your Mounties and your sort of Brooklyn Brawlers and all this other sort of like, you know, cheesy gimmicks of the early 90s. This level of realism had never been introduced before, and that was it. So he was sort of a real instigator of that Attitude Era and that change in direction for wrestling.
It did, and also what I love about that, Stone Cold was the man like say, Mike, he just transcended everything, changed the pop culture. And also, WWF, Vince McMahon, who everyone knew, they were losing in the ratings to WCW, where Hulk Hogan had jumped ship to them. He was the golden boy of wrestling. He moved to a different promotion. All these other wrestlers had jumped ship. And then Austin just swung it back. And all of a sudden, the WWF, and it obviously changed to WWE around about the early 2000s, it became the leader. But to flip what Scott was saying regarding the gun episode, you then had a guy called Mark, you're not going to say it, Scott, a guy called Mark Henry, who is an Olympic world record powerlifter called Sexual Chocolate. Yeah. And he went out with a woman. He was probably late 20s, early 30s. He went out with a woman who was 80 called Mae Young, who gave birth to a hand.
Just Chris, yes, but Mike, this wasn't real. This was a gimmick. This was a story in the show. She was
supposed to be pregnant because Sexual Chocolate was giving her the servicing of her life, and then she gave birth to a hand, Mike. I'm selling,
like on the show,
yeah. A hand. I'd have to send it you to watch it.
That just took like a whole weird, surreal, almost Lovecraftian turn.
It often did. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, one of the things that sort of like, is in with rose-tinted glasses, everyone looks back on like the Attitude Era and this stuff and go with this idea of like, oh, it was the best. And it was fantastic. You had like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock sort of comes into his own. You get Degeneration X with Triple H and Shawn Michaels and all the others. And these great sort of superstars come out. And they sort of, everyone talks about the great stuff, but there's an awful lot of crap in there as well. There's some really weird and incredibly sort of like, almost sort of like, really seedy stuff as well. Like, there was a wrestler called Sable, and, at one point, like, she parades around in basically what was akin to, like, they like rubber handprints over her boobs, aren't they, sort of thing. And you've got, like, one of what they call the colour commentators. So you have, like, two commentators, you got the play-by-play guy who sort of announces the sort of what moves are going on and gives you a commentary of the match, which is a guy called at the time was a guy called Jim Ross, JR. And then you get like, Oklahoma. It was Oklahoma. And then you get like the color commentary guy, who's sort of basically a character who sort of like just is there to expound on the story a bit more and sort of provide some color. Literally, sort of a guy called Jerry Lawler, who was a former wrestler, and Jerry Lawler is amazing. But the fact he's never been arrested or not part of the Me Too sort of uncoverment is baffling to me, because all he would talk about whenever a female wrestler would be out was her boobs. That was like the puppies. The puppies. And like, you go back and watch it now and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this.
It's also Vince McMahon as well, just to put a bit more of a spin on it. You're right, Vince McMahon was completely sleazy. All the girls, he'd have a storyline. Yeah. He owned the company, which for years nobody acknowledged. He was actually a commentator, Mike. Then when he did this screw job with Bret Hart and stuff, and it's a massive like thing where they actually, even though it's predetermined, he basically screwed him out of his sort of legacy within the wrestling. So really, we'd be there for another show.
You still think this is a work, don't you? You're convinced this whole thing is a work.
If you ever... Yeah, you're not convinced. I know obviously they still talk about it. It's called the Montreal screw job, Mike. If you ever get a chance, Montreal screw job, just put that in on YouTube and it's a fascinating rabbit hole. So Vince McMahon become this character, but then he would take it to extremes where he'd have like, if people wanted to keep the job, he'd pull his pants down in the middle of the ring and go, it's the Vince McMahon Kiss My Arse Club. And they have to kiss his arse in the ring. And then you get someone like doing like as if they would knock him in his balls or whatever. But you get loads having to do it to keep the jobs. It was ridiculous. Like, honestly, some of the stuff as a wrestling fan, it sounds utterly ridiculous. But this was the golden era of wrestling, really, what we're talking about. Because for every Rock you had, and the Rock was sensational. It was all about the mic work. Scott's right. The mic work. Honestly, Scott's so right. The Rock was sensational on the mic. Stone Cold was. Triple H was. You also had people like a guy called Al Snow used to come to the ring with a head, and then you had a guy called
that had head written on it.
And he talked to the head, and then you had a guy called Perry Saturn who come from WCW, and he had a mop, and he talked to a mop.
Yeah,
and that was his gimmick.
But that whole gimmick, but that wasn't because Perry Saturn came in as what were they called? It was him,
Benoit,
Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Eddie Guerrero. Is it the New Radicals? They were the New Radicals, weren't they? And they sort of broke them up a little bit after a year because Eddie Guerrero, bless his soul, he's dead now, but he was absolutely phenomenal wrestler. He's sort of like in that Greek, Mexican sort of lucha libre sort of style. Awesome wrestler. But all these guys were great. But Perry Saturn was like was a big guy. And they ran a gimmick where he'd taken too many concussions and was basically in a relationship with a mop. It ran for like a year. It was crazy. Yeah, there was some really weird stuff. To do this as well, they went, they did other things. So there was a character called Kane. I'm going to just finish with this one because this gets really weird. And it got a lot of flack as well. A bit later on, they had a character called Kane who was the Undertaker's brother. And the idea was that Kane was caught in the fire. The Undertaker had burnt down the parents' funeral home, which is why he continued to wrestle as an Undertaker. And they thought they'd killed Kane. So they brought back Kane, and he wore a mask and everything because he was supposed to be burnt under his mask. Anyway, years later, Kane did a gimmick where Katie Vick? Yeah. So Katie Vick, basically, they had this whole gimmick where he was sleeping, or he had some sort of intimate relations with her corpse. And they ran it like there's a funeral home and all this other stuff, and this whole thing of him sleeping with his dead body and something. It was, there was some very, very good stuff, but they also made some incredibly bad. Literally, anybody listening, check out Katie Vick. It's don't watch it, but it's like when you want to see how a wrestling promotion gets it wrong. And I remember watching it back in the day and thinking, like, I don't think they thought this one through.
No. We all remember the story of Marilyn Monroe, don't we? That was what there was supposed to be the rumor of her as well. The old necrophilia. But anyway, Jimmy Savile job. But anyway, sorry, Mike. It's like a proper. But Scott's what it was with Vince McMahon. The more ridiculous something is, like Vince McMahon was, his casual racism is unbelievable. Some of the stuff he does, it's literally ridiculous. There was a guy there for years who was an Afghanistan, sort of lived in Afghan. He was Italian, but because he had that sort of look, he made him to be an Afghan like sympathiser. He used to come out. They had Sergeant Slaughter, who was an American war hero, who come out and was an Iraqi sympathiser around the early 90s, fighting Hulk Hogan, the great American hero, with 2 souls. It's just like anything like that, Vince McMahon would jump on. I mean, the PG era now, so they can't be as extreme. They've got like, they're all for like the kids and that, and that's why people hate the wrestling now. I'm not a big fan of it.
Well, Chris, let's be fair though. When you're talking about this, right, you've just referred to obviously the Iron Sheik, and you've had like Sergeant Slaughter when he was, let's say, he was an Iraqi sympathiser. We did, what was it, Royal Rumble? No, but it was SummerSlam 92, wasn't it? Undertaker versus Kamala.
Oh my God.
And Kamala is basically sort of like a chubby black guy dressed up to be some sort of like native African tribesman, face paint, big sort of like a diamond-shaped shield and a wooden mask and all this other stuff. Like, this wasn't the Attitude Era. That was still the PG era. That was like a really sort of like child-friendly era. Yet they had some horrendous racial stereotypes going on. That you look, watching that match with Kamala and Undertaker, like, I was even things like Yokozuna, who wasn't Japanese. He was a Maori. So it was, they just sort of, some of the racial stereotyping is horrendous. They've even done it even today. There was a guy they had as an Asian gimmick, and he was Italian, or that sort of thing. It hasn't really gone away.
It's almost circus freak stuff, Mike. That's what it is. It's the more Vince McMahon loves, the more wild the gimmick. And they don't do a lot of gimmicks now because people just don't buy it. And that's one of the reasons why wrestling is quite disassociated with like our generation, because they're all athletes. They don't really have much of a story. It's just like grudge matches. You've done this to me, so I'm going to do that to you. And you've come and like, you've clotheslined me when I wasn't looking, or you hit me over the head with a belt. We're going to have a fight. There's none of like years ago. The gimmicks, honestly, Mike, I've just done a show, recorded a gimmick. Well, me and Scott are going to do and talk about like some of the worst gimmicks and stuff. And when you're pulling them out of the bag, you're like, how the hell did these even come to air? Like there's one I've just done called Waylon Mercy. And when I listen to I put his promo in the show, he's talking about like kids going on picnics with the family, and I'll show you a picnic. And I'm like, what is going on here? This is just not right at all. It's just, it's ridiculous. For all the Stone Cold Steve Austins, you've got some of the most unbelievable storylines with these characters. Ridiculous, honestly.
But to flip that round. Sorry, Michael. I'm just to flip that round though with gimmicks. Like gimmicks can still be. Every now and then a gimmick lands, and it will just sort of like take off, and sort of like as I said before about wrestling fans being incredibly forgetful and forgiving. Like they are willing to forgive something if it's good. You know, if it works well and it sort of works in the sort of they're good wrestlers, like they will forgive a lot. You know, and I think sort of like one of my favourite wrestlers, is sort of Chris, is Mick Foley. So Mick Foley is one of these guys back in the day, the Attitude Era, and he, you know, he's not cut, he's not chiseled, he's still a big guy, but he sort of the way he did it, he was like, okay, well I can't be a luchador, I can't be, you know, a sort of a Hulk Hogan or whatever, so I'm going to have to go extreme. So he did all the extreme matches, like King of the Death match in Japan, and did matches where instead of ring ropes, they had barbed wire, and they'd have like explosives in the ring and glass and all this other.
Jesus.
Yeah, like he has a scar down his left arm, I think. I can't remember, no, his right arm possibly. In which and it's quite a famous bit of video. Is he takes a bump onto a board, and the board has got Semtex and barbed wire on it. And because of the barbed wire, he couldn't roll away from the explosion quick enough, and so it basically just burned the skin off his arm and stuff. And so it singed him quite bad. But he's like, he's like known for basically just giving his body. There's a match called Hell in a Cell, and which is basically you get the ring, and then they put a big cage over the top of it, which is the cell. And he threw himself off it. I mean, it's got to stick 15, 16, 20 foot high. I don't know how big it is. It's big, put it that way. He came off the top of it to go through a table. And then he climbed back up it. And it's one of my favourite matches. It's incredible. He gets like stretchered out, rolls off the stretcher, pushes everyone away, crawls back up onto the top of this cell with the Undertaker. And then the Undertaker sort of lifts him up, choke slams him, but the cage gives way. Like it wasn't supposed to. Gives way. And he falls through to the ring, 12 feet? Lands on his back. And when they rush in, like people are like backstage, people are like legitimately like terrified that he's going to kill himself. Like, you know, it's going to go wrong. All rushing out to the ring. Jeez. And there's a video, the camera gets into the ring and he rolls around, he tries to smile, and it looks like he's got a big bogey up his nose. But it's not. It's a tooth that's come out of his mouth, gone through his lip and gone into his nose. And it's just blood and stuff everywhere. And it's sort of like, this is, so Mick Foley, that's how he got to the top. He got to the top by being incredibly good on the mic and just doing this crazy stuff. And one of the things Chris and I talked about for our first talk for Wrestling Gold was he did an angle where he was a character called Mankind. And he was incredibly soft. Like this character of Mankind was sort of like a bit silly, and it was the comedy side of the wrestling Attitude Era. Like at one point, Vince McMahon's in hospital and Mankind turns up and it's all comedy, like, you know, accidental trip falls and pratfalls, and he brings him a clown and some balloons and this other stuff. It's quite funny, actually. But he was the joke character. Like he'd sort of tried to sort of move away a little bit from this hardcore stuff. And then he has this angle with Triple H. And one of the reasons I love this angle so much is they do it in 6 weeks. And this is what, you know, when Chris and I talked about it, he goes from being this sort of thing, and they basically make a mockery of Mankind, so Triple H does. And they hold him out and they fire him, they get him fired. And then all the other wrestlers come out and like, you've got to reinstate Mick Foley, and they keep humiliating him. And they beat the crap out of him. So Triple H is part of a group called Degeneration X. And they deck him, and they leave him all bloody and stuff. And then at the moment, as Mankind, he wears this like leather mask, because he's supposed to be, and this is where it gets weird, he's supposed to be sort of mentally deranged. So he wears this mask, and in the match, he like rips off this mask, and then sort of like starts to fight back. And you're like, yes! And the next week, he comes out again, wearing the mask, wearing his sort of shirt and his tie as he does. Explaining it sounds weird, you've got to see a picture of it. But it's got all the blood down it. And he sort of says, like, you know, he says, me and you, Triple H, we're supposed to have a match at Royal Rumble. But Mankind, he's in no condition to take you on. And you see Triple H looking all smug. He says, but I've got to give the WWF fans a replacement. So I'm going to announce him right now. And Triple H, I think you know him. And he pulls off the mask. He rips open the shirt. And he's wearing he's wearing a Cactus Jack t-shirt. And this Cactus Jack is the character he was when he did like the Japanese death matches and he was doing all this hardcore stuff. And the crowd just go mental. Like the crowd, and Triple H like looks terrified. Like he just he's like, this has gone wrong. I've pushed him too far now, and that's the gimmick. Like you pushed Mankind too far. That Mankind can't take him, but Cactus Jack can. But the crowd go mental. And really, all he's done is take his shirt off. Like, it's still the same guy. Do you know what I mean? And that's, but the way it's set up, like, you're like, oh my God, he's Cactus Jack now. And you're like, no, he's still Mick Foley, but it's the intent behind it. I mean, the match it leads to is a no holds barred sort of like hardcore match at Royal Rumble 2000, and it's amazing. But just that move, like, the fans are willing to go, I'm in with this. I'm so into this. Like, I know it's one guy changing one T-shirt for another T-shirt, but I'm in for it. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I love it so much. Like, it's so silly, but to me, I mean, even to me, just talking about that gives me goosebumps, because that's probably one of my favourite moments in my wrestling sort of viewing history. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and I know obviously, Mike, we've proper gone down this rabbit hole now, because wrestling.
I've only got one other questiony thing after
all right,
this. That's fine.
I'll be very quick. So what Scott's saying about, like, with Mick Foley setting up this place, he's taking a mask off and everything. One of the best ones I've seen is Hulk Hogan. For years, wore red and yellow. That was Hulk Hogan's colours from, like, he wins the WWF Championship in 1983. He carries the company for 7-8 years, and then basically the fans got sick of him. And there was a big steroid scandal where there was, like, they were all on gear, but, like, Hulk Hogan had never touched steroids, and it all come out that they had. This doctor had been prescribing steroids to all the wrestlers. There's no way you get that big naturally. There's not a cat in hell's chance. And he had to leave, so he ends up leaving, goes to a rival company, and then he has the red and yellow goals, but the crowd are going, like, a bit stale, and they're like, we're fucking sick of this Hulk Hogan good guy, he gets beat, and then he comes back and he, like, does this hulking up thing where the crowd go crazy, and they were just bored of him, and he was, like, early 40s at this point, late 30s, early 40s, and he changed into this black and white NWO, and he became like an anti-hero, and everyone hated him, and he became a bad guy. First time ever, like, for like maybe 12 years. He'd never been a bad guy when he was, like, at his peak. He was always a good guy. And he'd wanted to change to a bad guy, like, behind the scene. And he did. And there's a scene in WCW where, and I watched it recently, his son comes in and he's worn this black and white for about 5 or 6 years. And he's like, Dad. And it's his real son, but it's part of the storyline. And he goes, Dad, like Nick, his son, he goes, I thought you were going to wear this. And he pulls this red and yellow gear out, which he's not worn, which is the Hulk Hogan. This was like the Hulk Hogan we see at the late 90s had like he still had the crowbar moustache, but he had like the black beard and everything going with it, the sort of like coloured in beard as well as the blonde moustache. Next minute, he comes out, and it should have been in the WWF really, because that's his spiritual home, but he's in WCW. And I'm not a fan of WCW really, and the crowd, Mike, just from him changing his outfit to red and yellow. Not only does the crowd go absolutely bananas, the Hulk's then getting made up, the commentary building up, going, when he's got that clothes on, he's just a different man. He's like 2 men. He's superhuman. And this is like, I'm wrestling people. And I can watch that over and over because it's real music, because the WCW music was never right. It was never the WWF music. But I can the crowd go absolutely mental, and they're the sort of things with wrestling for me. They can just do something stupid like a costume change, and honestly, they could sell off the back of that. They probably sold, I'm not exaggerating, maybe $1 million worth of merchandise just from him simply changing his outfit. That's how clever wrestling can be. It's so ridiculous. Anyway, sorry about that, Mike, but yeah.
No, that's an amazing story, and all I have to do is, when I eventually come on Wrestling Gold, we'll either get like a big viewing party match thing, or you can choose loads of random clips and we'll just talk about them and include links and descriptions and blah, because I do want to experience a lot of this. One of the reasons I want to have you guys on, because I want to hear about all this stuff. I love hearing how passionate you guys are. It's like what I get like if I talk to myself about Star Wars. It's just if as you guys know what I can get like, you say a certain word, oh, I can get into this, and then you get really excited. It's like, with Star Wars, there's loads of silly things in it. I know it's not real, obviously, much like you guys know the parts of like Hulk Hogan doesn't become another person when he changes outfit, but when you're in the moment and when you're in the air quotes fandom, when you're in that and something like that happens, you just get so excited. It's like that visceral love for it. It's like, yeah, I'm happy that stuff's happening, even though it doesn't mean anything, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything, because then you can look into it like nothing really means anything. But not getting down an existential dread route, we're talking about wrestling. One thing I want to ask you guys about wrestling is obviously there's stigma that comes along with it that obviously you guys sort of touched upon, saying that there's still stigma with it now and there was stigma in the past and things, but obviously in the last to me, it seems like the last 10 plus years, probably similar time to sort of the MCU and also Star Wars coming back, is nerd culture went from being, and I think Big Bang Theory probably had a hand in it as well, to be honest, but like the nerd culture has come from being, oh, you like Star Wars a lot, you're a nerd, to, oh, you're cool, you like the cool nerdy stuff. Has wrestling, to your guys' opinions, kind of taken that form, kind of gone with the sort of nerdy Comic-Con subculture, moving into the mainstream a little bit more in recent times, or is it actually going away? I've let you both be too polite to each of you, so I'll let Chris go first.
Sure. I think wrestling now is not in the subconscious of the kids growing up like it was. I think there's a generation before us that is still into wrestling. I know, like, my brother, he's like mid-20s now, probably same age as you, Mike. He's 25, 26. He loves the wrestling. Yeah. He grew up with, like, Stone Cold, The Rock. Obviously, I caught that as I was going into my sort of late teens, early 20s. He was like a young kid. Even going into the 2000s, he continued to watch it. Last night we're playing Grand Theft Auto Online, the whole family. I've got I'm the oldest of 9. I've got 5 sisters, 3 brothers, and we've got literally a room full of my family playing Grand Theft Auto. My sisters, my daughter, my nephew, my brothers, and we're all playing. And my brother Javier, he's like 26, and straight away he sets me up for it, and he just does this. He's like, he just does a Stone Cold Steve Austin line, and he's and he does a line. I'm supposed to be racing this serious 41-year-old guy, and I'm going, what? And then we're doing this, and my sisters are going, shut the fuck up. me and my brother do the same thing. We tag each other every single day on Facebook. Me, him, and his best mate. A segment of Ric Flair from about 2009, 2010 with a guy called Jay Lethal, and they do this segment where the guy's impersonating Ric Flair, and we keep tagging each other, and this has gone on for about 5 years, and we go, have you seen this? And we just keep doing it every day, winding each other up. It's just us on this guy's videos. It's got thousands of views. It's one of the best wrestling promos ever. And what I'm getting at is, there's a generation after my brother that hates wrestling because they changed it into this PG, just basically athletic match. There's a few gimmicks got over, like Daniel Bryan, this guy called Bray Wyatt, Randy Orton, people like that. They get over. And then people like The Undertaker. I will watch wrestling now when the old boys come back. So The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Stone Cold comes back, The Rock. If they come in it, I can watch it and watch them segments because they're allowed to be their characters. Anything else now is just diluted shit for me, and I understand it. However, people from my generation, like the Ric Flairs, Hulk Hogan's, they have pop culture wise, Ric Flair is probably the most, in America, he's the most, even more than Hulk Hogan and Stone Cold, he's the most pop culture icon because they get him to go, Mike, to basketball games, American football, hockey, baseball. He goes and motivates the team. A wrestler who is in his 70s goes, because he does the woo, and I love the woo, like the woo is just the best ever. The whole family still does the Ric Flair woo. We all do it. We went on holiday a few years ago, and we're not the English knobheads, but we decided one night, we were on this either side of the hotel, me and my wife, my wife's family, and my wife's cousin, he's about 25 to us, loves Ric Flair. We're doing a woo off at like 1 a.m, and everyone's coming out on the balcony, and we're going, woo! And it's like, what the fuck? And then we're like, slowly, we're like doing the moonwalk back into our rooms, and everyone was kicking off. But Ric Flair is an absolute icon now for American sports because of his woo and the fact that you see him and they'll get him in San Francisco 49ers for the Super Bowl. They're getting him in some of the games, and he's doing a wrestling promo in an NFL changing room with these and they're all doing the dance and the Ric Flair strut and wooing and everything, like doing. You see American footballers doing wrestling finishing moves, Ric Flair strut, Hulk Hogan stuff. It's ridiculous. So I think, pop culture wise, it's more in America, it's there, but now it isn't in the subconscious like it was when we were kids. Not at all. Not at all.
What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I agree with Chris completely. I think at the moment it's in a definite lull. And if anything, I mean, there's the WWE has always been the big boy. Since it won the Monday Night Wars. In the late 90s, the WWE has been the big boy, and there's been others that have come and gone that have challenged. There was obviously WCW, ECW, then TNT came along, and TNA, came along, and then more recently there's AEW, which seems to be really challenging and stuff. And it is about the problem. I think is that thing of it, the WWE thrives best when it has two things: when it has competition or it's after something, and it is personality driven. When you think of that era, of that first era, the first time it got big, when sort of like Vince McMahon Sr. and Vince McMahon Jr. sort of got together, and they took over all the territories in the early 80s and they made the WWF. Hulk Hogan was all over the place. As a personality, he wasn't great in the ring, but he was a god. He had his own flipping cartoon. Yeah. Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. He appears in the A-Team. He appears in, he had a film career that's horrendous, but still, he was appearing in TV shows. He did SNL. He did all this stuff. You could not move for literal Hulkamania in that era. And then they built on it. That was the idea, that it was just there. It was in the zeitgeist because they struck gold with Hulk Hogan. I mean, you had characters like Macho Man Randy Savage, Ric Flair, Ultimate Warrior. All these really, day-glow, flamboyant characters that were just bigger than life. These sort of gladiators in a circus arena. That just sort of, it was in people's minds and they just sort of got it. I mean, I had wrestling figures when I was a kid. I had a Hulk Hogan and a Warrior. I'm pretty sure I had sort of probably Hulk Hogan pajamas at one point. It just struck gold. And you can see that when he went to WCW, there's a lull in this country because WCW didn't really get play in this country, but WWE did. And when you strike, again, that late 90s, the Attitude Era, and you get those characters coming back and appearing in things, Stone Cold Steve Austin fighting off against Mike Tyson, appearing in the main, appears on the news. The Rock starts making sort of waves and stuff. All of a sudden, it's appearing in mainstream news. They're appearing on mainstream television. They're guesting on things. It's in that zeitgeist because it's sort of new and it's fresh. And it's these personalities. One of the things is when Austin broke his neck, and he ended up having to go for surgery, and he was out for 18 months. Did bits and pieces, but he was out for 18 months. And a lot of the guys really had to step up. And you see that's when The Rock really comes into his fore, comes to really comes to him in himself. And you see these personalities getting a chance to come out, and they've become big megastars and stuff. We don't have that anymore. There are no personalities because, as Chris rightfully said, they went through an era of just becoming an athlete. There are no real names. John Cena, they tried to hit it with John Cena, and he's fine. He's not a great wrestler. He's not a great actor. He's not a great personality. Really, he's all right for for a different generation. But he released a bleeding rap album. They tried to push it, and it just kept failing. They don't have a Hogan. They don't have an Austin or a Rock or something like that. And that's the problem for me. But the other thing is, they've never had any competition, so it doesn't matter. There's nowhere else to go. So, they can sort of have this huge, sprawling, bloody cast of characters and do whatever they want with them because no one's going to go anywhere else. I think they need that competition. And they need someone who's going to carry the company in a legit kind of way. One of the things they do, I think they've reached a turning point, and weirdly, I think this situation with the coronavirus has sort of pushed them into a new territory. It sort of forced them to do it because it's a physical medium, it's an arena filled with people, and without that, it's just two people in a ring, sort of. Literally just sort of play fighting, for want of a better phrase. So they really have started to try to do different things. They've really pushed the women's league, which is fantastic. There's some really, really excellent female workers coming through now. There's still some crap, but that's just there's some crap male wrestlers as well. It's just part and parcel of it. But they recently had WrestleMania, and I watched it this year, or I watched bits and pieces of it, but. The two things is they did some matches that were very sort of standard. They couldn't have the big arena, so they did it in sort of a smaller arena. And they were like, what can we do that's different? What can we do that's different? So do you know what? They had Chris, what do they call it? Was it a casket match for The Undertaker?
Yeah, it's usually a casket match, wasn't it? I know he did Hell in the Cell, but he mainly did the casket match, didn't he?
With him and AJ Styles, so Undertaker.
Oh, sorry, no, the Boneyard.
Boneyard match.
Sorry, yeah.
But it was literally in a field. Like they filmed it in a field, and it was filmed like an action scene. Like Undertaker rode up on his motorbike, and they had sort of cuts, and they did all kinds of stuff, and it had the special effects and stuff. It was ace. It was one of the most interesting. That was in part like they split Mania over 2 nights, but that was the first. I was like, this is a really cool match. Like I'm loving this. This is really good fun. It's somewhat different. The second night, they had a Funhouse match, or what do you call it? The Playhouse,
Firefly Funhouse.
Firefly, there you go. Firefly Funhouse. So there's a character called Bray Wyatt who's done a couple of things, and he now has this sort of like weird, almost like a sinister Mick Foley-esque kind of deal, where he's sort of like a weird. You've heard of Mr. Rogers, be my neighbour. He does that, but he's a big guy with this big beard, and he just looks terrifying. And all the characters in the house are like, there's a broken doll and there's a witch and all this other stuff. It's really weird. But he's sort of playing it up as this sort of sinister sort of children's entertainer, and then he becomes this like demon thing with a Joker face. But he had a match with John Cena in this Firefly Funhouse match, and basically Cena turns up to fight him in the ring. And he's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And then he sort of passes out, and he's in this sort of. Then obviously he's in the TV in this sort of like funhouse in this playset think of like Saturday morning TV. He's on this sort of thing. Has to go through a door. And then all of a sudden, like, he goes through the stages of his career with Bray Wyatt teasing him and doing stuff. And it was, like, really surreal. And then he pins him at the end with this move. And it all turns out the whole angle is that 6 years earlier, they had another Mania match. And something had happened in that. And this was sort of like payback. And John Cena lost the match. But, like, it didn't make a great deal of sense. But it was amazing. And all of a sudden I was like, I would watch more of this. Like, less of the boring stuff, more of this. Like, this is weird.
Crazy, off the wall, almost like sketch comedy mix and surrealism.
Yes,
like wrestling.
Exactly. Yeah, you have got an opportunity. This is the weirdest, like, with wrestling, as I said, because wrestling fans will buy into this stuff because that's what we do. Try it. You've tried this. It's worked. Don't go mad for it, but give us more of this stuff. This is great. And that's what I think, maybe they can do that again. Because people were talking about that on Twitter. That match was being talked about like crazy. Sort of touched the zeitgeist again a little bit. So they've got the opportunity, but I don't know, they just keep... There's a worry that they're supposed to be sort of for kids and they don't want to push it too far at the moment. But they could do it. They could easily come back, but I do think they're missing some of the key ingredients at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe it will come back in some sort of rebirth in a few years. Maybe it will decline enough for the sort of WWE and things and the other sort of wrestling companies to realise and go, okay, people aren't as interested. Well, we need a reboot wrestling in a sense. Yeah. But I mean, that'd be a great conversation for another day, as it is getting a little bit late now. But I have loved having you guys on and talk about. I've loved hearing all not only the wrestling stories from your own career, Scott, but also just hearing the passion of how much you guys love wrestling. And it's now making me definitely want to. We'll sort something out on Wrestling Gold or Chit-Chat, whatever. We'll sort it out. We'll have like some sort of watch party, and I'll watch some of the crazy fights and things, and we can have a good laugh about it. Because it sounds like a really, really good time. I'd love to do that. So we'll definitely put something like that in the calendar at some point in the future. But just before we go, if you guys each want to promote yourself, essentially, Scott, if you want to go first, and then we'll finish up with Chris.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, so I've got 2 other podcasts going out there. 20th Century Geek, where I sort of catch up with all kinds of different people and talk about everything that's geeky, sort of from the 20th century, movie reviews, comic reviews, anything and everything. I've got a retrospective of Indiana Jones coming up, and or I'll do some the pulp films of the early 90s as well coming up soon. My other podcast is Stories Out of Time and Space, where myself and Julian Darius, a good friend of mine, we talk about all sorts of sci-fi films and get into quite good big depth of those, get into really sort of like nitty-gritty of why we like them or don't like them. And actually, we've got an epic Red Dwarf retrospective coming up very soon. We just did a 4-hour podcast on a couple of the seasons.
On my way. I look forward to that. I love Red Dwarf.
So yeah, they're my 2 podcasts. Chris,
Awesome,
do you want an hour to talk about yours?
I think as we talk about wrestling, I'll just predominantly talk about my new one. So it's Wrestling Gold on Twitter at Wrestling Gold 4 or the Wrestling Gold podcast on all your podcast catching apps. Mike, it'd be an honour for you to come on. I'd love you and Scott. I love the dynamic of us, and I just wish Dave was into it a bit more because we could have the four of us again. But it'd probably be about a 5-hour podcast if all of us get together. But it's I love it. I absolutely love it. Thank you. I mean, I've got Comics in Motion, VHS Strikes Back, and Chris and Dave's reality cast, which was originally the Love Island cast, and Dave hates reality stuff, but he's spending more time watching it than me at the moment, I do believe. So, yeah. Anyway, I won't go and bore you with all the other stuff, but yeah, if you can get over to Wrestling Gold, I'd love the support, guys, because it is a new podcast, and Scott's on for the first episode. It was only right to get the main man on, and he's going to be on again soon. And Mike, you are definitely coming on. We're going to make you go through 100%. Hell. We'll try and not make you watch the angle where she gives birth to a hand, but we'll try and give you something that might give you something else.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I look forward to that. It's going to be great. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
And that's the end of the podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. As I said in the intro, check out the multitude of shows that both Scott and Chris are involved in the description, and there are loads of them, so there's more than enough to get your teeth into. Coming up, next week should be an episode out, which I'm due to record with Dave of Comics in Motion and also Max Byrne of the Mandatory Marvel and DC podcast. Both of those can be found on the feed of Comics in Motion. So that should be the next week's one. I'm not sure if it'll be a 1 or a 2-parter. We'll see. I'm hoping to record an episode with Chris and Dave of Comics in Motion. Chris was on today's episode. Chris and Dave have been on previously. But I'm hoping to do an episode with both of those guys. I'm also hoping to do an episode with Janine Mercer, but I think that's going to be recorded in July sort of time. There's going to be an episode likely in June-ish time, maybe, that I'm going to be recording with a fairly heavy band. A friend of mine's kind of half managing, so they asked if they could come on the show, and they're pretty damn good, so going to have them on likely. I won't say who they are just in case. And yeah, so still kind of trying to keep it casual and fun and things with people as repeat guests, but obviously with this music one, I've been approached, so why not? And also, in this time, there's a lot of people listening to a lot of new music, so if you're into heavy metal and stuff, you know, it'll be a great chat. If not, and you're not interested in heavy metal, you can still listen because it's interesting to hear people talk about heavy metal or heavy music, hardcore, metalcore, whatever heavy genre you want to kind of align it with. It's interesting to hear people talk about that without having to hear the music itself. So that's kind of what's going to be coming up. I think there'll be a couple of other things. I'm going to make some contacts with people and potentially have Scott from this podcast on again to talk about other stuff, not just wrestling. Potentially do the same with Max Byrne as well. I'm trying to kind of just, as I say, try and do guests that I've had on previously to partially make my life easier, but also to keep things fun and casual, because the chats, just like the one this week, were just full of laughs and fun, and I think that's what we all need at the moment, less so serious chats and things. So that's kind of what you can expect. I'll just say now as well, I've obviously got that show Star Wars Comics in Canon. If you're new to the show and you haven't heard me talk about that before, essentially on the feed of Comics in Motion, which is where Chris and this chat is from, I have a show that comes out on Saturday/Sunday, depending on scheduling, and it's basically normally around 15 to 20 minutes. There's 1 or 2 episodes that are about half an hour long, and it's basically myself talking about Star Wars comics. It's more so me trying to connect the dots. It gives some general narrative to the comic at the time of the episode, as well as some connections to other bits of the lore. So I did one episode about the Rise of Kylo Ren comic, which is quite cool, and it's how Kylo Ren, after he burned down the Jedi temple in Last Jedi that you saw in the flashback, how he got from there to where he is in The Force Awakens, who the Knights of Ren are, that sort of thing. So I go into a bit of detail in that. One of the most recent episodes was I've now started with the Star Wars comics, which was the first run of Star Wars comics in the new canon. They're out early 2015, and I did the first story arc of that, which is Skywalker Strikes. The chat is, well, it's less of a chat and me kind of talking at you, but the episode itself is a bit longer than normal. I think it's the longest one I've done because I delved quite deep into it narratively wise, because where it's one of the first canon comics, there's not as many connections to other things, but it's good grounds to kind of get it going, because the main run of Star Wars comics is 75 issues. So in that one, I just did the first 6. And as I said, it was called Skywalker Strikes, and it actually shows the first confrontation between Vader and Luke, which wasn't actually an Empire Strikes Back like people think. It is actually a few weeks or months after A New Hope, because Vader's trying to track down the pilot who blew up the Death Star, and he didn't know his name, so he actually tries to get Boba Fett involved as well. It's all very cool and interesting, so I talk about that, and I try and sort of paraphrase things just so people can get a general gist. The idea of the Star Wars Comics in Canon podcast is, if you're someone who's read a lot of the comics and is deep into it, you can listen to these episodes to give a reminder of those comics, as well as connections to other elements of the lore and other comics and things. Or if you've had no interaction with Star Wars outside of the movies or the TV series, it's a good jumping off point. It means that either you don't have to buy the comics, or you can just kind of listen to my podcasts and see how it goes, just so you kind of get a slow, wider look into the Star Wars canon, or you can listen to my show, hear some of the comics I talk about, and then you can go and buy them, because I talk about the Kylo Ren one and I don't go into all the details in that Kylo Ren comic, because there's so many things in there that I kind of want people to read the comic itself, especially because it's quite a new one. I don't want to just read out and spoil it straight away, whereas the old Star Wars comic that's over 5 years old now, I can talk about that a bit more. So that's generally what you can expect if you want to check out Star Wars Comics in Canon. If you follow me in any of the social media places, you'll see me post about it once or so, normally a week. But yeah, it's on the feed of Comics in Motion. Be sure to check those guys out, because they've got the mandatory Marvel and DC run on there, Indie Comics Spotlight by Tony Farina, as well as the Comics in Motion podcast. So lots to get your teeth sunk into. Second time I've said that in this outro, and I'm not going to change it. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I really appreciate all you guys listening, especially to the end of this very long episode. And yeah, hope you have a great time. Talk to you next week.